we tired yet? Ann told you last night that you can be transformed by Jesus. That because of his high priestly ministry, you can be transformed. And the obvious next question for you should be, how? And the answer comes here in Hebrews chapter 11. So if you have a Bible, open up. We're going to be in Hebrews chapter 11. And there's one word that occurs throughout this text. It's the most important word. It's the answer to the question, how? It's pistis. Say it with me. Pistis. And you're going, I'm not familiar with this word. What is the word pistis? It can be translated as faith, as trust. 243 times the word pistis shows up in the New Testament. 34 of those times, or 32 of those times, it's in the book of Hebrews, and 24 of those times are in Hebrews chapter 11. Over and over again, we hear the word faith. And so this text begins with a definition of faith. And this is really important because we have all kinds of misconceptions about what faith, what trust means, and how it gets practiced. So in Hebrews chapter 11, starting in verse 1, now faith, trust, pistis, is the assurance of things hoped for. That word assurance is a word that describes like the proof of a down payment. Right? It's reliable. It's the reliability of something you put your hope in. The conviction of things not seen. That word conviction is a word that gets used in law courts to convict people of crimes, right? Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. This is logical language. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God. And so there's some intellectual commitments that happen in this trusting, in this faith. We believe some things, we think some things about how the world came to be and our place in it. So that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. I grew up in Arizona, and that meant I grew up around a lot of Mormons. And I didn't know anything about Mormonism when I was a kid. I wasn't from a Mormon family, and so I had all these friends, and they would talk to me, and they had these big families, and they would talk to me and invite me over and tell me about their Mormon beliefs, their Mormon faith, and I started asking them questions. I was like, so you're telling me this and that, and they had these different beliefs, these doctrines that they believed, and things that they thought, and I asked questions about them because they didn't seem trustworthy, they didn't seem true, they seemed unreliable. And I would ask them, like, what do you do when you discover there's this thing that you're supposed to believe and it doesn't seem true? And they would say, you just need to you'll put your faith in, trust, and you'll feel a burning in your bosom, which is a weird phrase. But the idea was, you'll feel it. This text says pretty clearly, and you really need to hear this, faith is not a feeling. Do you hear me? Faith is not a feeling. And I know that today and this week, you've had some big feelings. And those aren't bad. They're not wrong, but that's not faith. So, what is this definition of faith? Well, it goes on in verse 6 to describe, without faith, it's impossible to please God. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists. And, well, okay, we just have to believe that God exists. Well, it's not just believing, like knowing in your brain that I think God is actually real, but it's trusting that this God who I think is real is actually leading me to the best kind of life. And that he exists, not just that he exists, but that he rewards those who seek him. And so we live in this culture, this very sort of faith-less culture is how we think about it. And what I mean by that is that we live in a time where you're kind of, it's portrayed to you that you can either believe in Jesus or believe in nothing. Just like you could decide, I like to wear Nike or I like to wear Adidas. And it's just sort of like, it's a choice and you can take it or leave it. And it's like, if you decide to have faith, that's weird but fine. And if you decide not to have faith, that's also whatever, that's your choice. But the reality is you and me and everybody we know is going to put their trust, their hope in something. Is that something reliable? Is that something trustworthy? Is that something worth living for? Is that something worth dying for? Because what this text invites us to see is that trust, faith, is trusting in a God who can raise the dead. That's what faith is in Hebrews chapter 11. My daughter, I told you she's 14, and when she was little, she was learning how to swim. And when she was learning how to swim, she didn't know how to do it, but she would get in the pool, and she'd be in the kiddie part of the pool and swimming around. She'd get wet, and she was like, yeah, this is great. This is swimming. It's not swimming. You're in a puddle, right? You're just sort of splashing around. And then she would get the floaties, and she would get in the pool with me, and I would hold her, and she would get in the water, and she would be like, yeah, Dad, I'm swimming now. No, this isn't you're floating. That's great. I'm proud of you. And then she started to learn to kick her legs the way you're supposed to kick your legs when you swim. And then she started to paddle her arms, and she was like, Dad, I'm swimming. No, you're kind of like pushing yourself around with a floaty. And then finally one day I said, okay, Charlotte, it's time for you to take off the floaties and swim to me. Use all the stuff that you've learned. You've seen me show you how to do it. I've swam in front of you, and I've shown you how to kick and how to move your arms, and you've been in the water, and you're getting used to it. And she was terrified. She was scared because, of course, if she started swimming and it didn't work, she would sink to the bottom and die. She would drown. And I invited her in, and she's like, Dad, I think I'm good just in the puddles. Like, this is great. Like, the puddles are fun. And then she would see all the kids playing in the pool actually swimming. And it was like, that looks fun too, but this is safe. What are you willing to trust? What do you want to put your hope in? And I told her, I said, Charlotte, you got to swim to me. Dad, I don't know. And ultimately it comes down to, I said, Charlotte, do you trust me? Do you think I'm a reliable dad? Over the course of your life, have I shown you that I'm willing to just let you drown? Well, no. But here's the thing, students. There will be times in your life of following Jesus where you will wonder if God is going to let you down. That's part of the issue in the book of Hebrews. This is a people that's tired. They've been following Jesus, and it's been hard, and they're wondering, does God even care? In fact, in Hebrews chapter 10, right before chapter 11, there's this quotation from the prophet Habakkuk. And Habakkuk is this prophet that most of us maybe know nothing about. And we've talked about prophets already, and prophets, their job is to speak to the people on behalf of God. But Habakkuk is different. He doesn't just speak to the people on God's behalf. Habakkuk prays this prayer. He speaks to God on behalf of the people. And so in the book of Habakkuk, chapter 1, verse 2, this prophet is seeing the people of God are being carried off into exile, and they're being marched to their own demise. And he's just going, God, where are you? And so in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 2, he says, O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? Or cry to you violence, and you will not save? God, do you even care? And there will be times, if you decide to trust in Jesus, where you wonder if God cares about you at all. And this text says, trust him. Trust in the God who can raise the dead. But it doesn't just give us a definition, it gives us an example. Actually, not just one example, it gives us 18 examples. There's 18 names in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11. We're going to read about all of them. No, we're not. I want to focus on two people, Abraham and Sarah. And we read about Abraham and Sarah in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 8 through, really through 21. All about Abraham and Sarah. And you may know their story. It's from Genesis. Genesis chapter 12. God calls Abraham, and he's living in the land of Ur, and he's called by God, hey, I want you to leave the land. I want you to leave your family. I want you to leave your home, take your wife, and I want you to move this land I'm going to give to you, and I'm going to make your name great. I'm going to bless you, and you are going to be a huge nation of people. Abraham doesn't have any kids. And so what does he do? He trusts that the God who's calling him is calling him to something better. And so he leaves his family, and he takes his wife, and he goes to this land, and he doesn't know what's going to happen, and he wanders around. And he doesn't know how it's going to happen, and he keeps getting older, and year after year he's thinking, okay, God promised me I'm going to have a family. He promised me that I'm going to have children. He promised me that I'm going to have so many kids that it's going to be like sand on the shore of the sea or stars in the sky. That's how many. No one's going to be able to count my kids, but like I don't have any. And it says that he gets older and older, and pretty soon Sarah is 90 and Abraham's 100. And they're thinking, this just isn't going to happen for us. But God said, he promised. Is that God reliable? And Abraham believes God, he trusts God, and because he trusts this God to be reliable, he continues to follow, even when he doesn't know, even when he doesn't understand how it's possible. It says in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. I don't know where you're going to go from this place. But do you trust the God that brought you here? And then it talks about as you get older and older, they want this child, and they've been praying for this child, and they think this child's going to come, and they keep waiting, and they keep waiting. And it says that in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 12, he was as good as dead. 100 years old. His body was as good as dead. Sarah is 90. I don't know what you know about gynecology, but that's too old to have a kid. And it's so silly that when angels come to visit them to say, yes, you're going to have a child, Sarah starts to laugh. She's like, that's ridiculous. It's hilarious. I'm going to have a kid. And so they name the little boy that they have Laughter, Isaac. And it's ridiculous. It's this joke. But here's the point. Look at Hebrews chapter 11. Read this with me. Verse 13. Sarah and Abraham, these all died in faith. They died trusting, hoping, not having received the things promised. They left to get a promise they never got. They died before they received the promise. But having seen them and greeted them from afar, they only saw the glimmer. They didn't have a bunch of kids, they had one. And having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth, here's what you need to know about the students. There is a reality that if you follow Jesus, there is just a truth you will never fully be fulfilled until the resurrection. Not your wife, not your home, not your husband, not your kids. None of that stuff is ultimately going to fulfill you. I promise. Because you're strangers and exiles hoping for a better promise that you're not going to see. For we are people who speak thus, make it clear that they were seeking a homeland. And they had been thinking of that land from which they'd gone out. They would have opportunity to return. If they were just looking for a place to live, they would have eventually decided, you know what, this is too hard. I'm just going to go back home. I'm going to go back to to my family. But in verse 16, they desire a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city. Do you believe in a God who will raise the dead? Do you believe in a God who is worth living for? And maybe even dying for? The outcomes of faith. We get a definition of faith, and then we get examples of faith, and then we get a list of these outcomes of faith. And some of these outcomes are amazing. I mean, you read in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32, what more shall I say, for time would fail me to tell, of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection. Do you believe in a God who can raise the dead? And there are so many stories where the outcome of faith is a victory. I mean, I could tell you about some of the stories I know. I could tell you about my friend Jenny, who was addicted to meth, and God healed her of that. I could tell you about my best friend Jason, his daughter Kate, when she had this heart deformity, and we prayed for Kate, and then it went away. And she was healed. And now she's this incredible track athlete, and she's the same age as my daughter, and every time I look at her, I see, oh, this is a miracle from God. I could tell you about my friend Dan, who works with women escaping trafficking, from North Korea. They're North Korean women. They escape, and so he has this house in South Korea, and they help these women escape oppression and bondage. He told me about this one woman who she was digging for clams on the beach just for this activity, and she just started to weep, and they asked her, what's going on? She said, well, this reminds me of the time when I was in North Korea, and they were burying my children alive right in front of my eyes. And she escaped. I could tell you about my friend Kurt. He's 6'8", 270 pounds. He competed in a triathlon, and he was in the Clydesdale division. Okay. Giant human being, big white guy. The first time I met him, he just gave me a hug and picked me up. And it was just like, all right, I'm like a child in his arms. And Kurt felt called by God to go to India to tell people about Jesus. He doesn't know Hindi, but he felt called by God, and so he went there, and didn't make any sense, and he ends up marching to this really remote village, and he's in this village, and he doesn't know what he's doing, but he gets there, and he starts talking to these people, and they're all excited, and he figures out through a translator that these people have had a prophecy about a giant white person coming to tell them about the God they need to worship. I can tell you story after story about how people have been protected and healed and transformed. I could tell you about my friend Pastor Louis in Kenya who gives away all this money and food that he doesn't have to love these single moms and bring them into the church and transform their lives and transform his city. I mean, I could tell you story after story. Your youth leaders could tell you more. And it's incredible to see the victories that come with faith. But for every single one of those victories, you have what you see in verse 36. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. They went about in the skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and the caves of the earth. And for every one of those stories of victory I could tell you about, my friend Joni, who was going to do ministry around Christmas time to ring the bells for the Salvation Army, and she's a single mom, and she's just trying to love her kid, and she dies on the way to ring the bells of the Salvation Army, trying to live out her faith and obedience to God. I can tell you about Emily, who's my friend. I remember when she was your age, and she was sitting in these chairs, and she heard about faith and obedience to God, and she wept with me, and she just said, I want that, but I'm just depressed. And I'm trying to believe in Jesus, and I do, but I still feel bad. And trusting him didn't just make that go away. And I can tell you about Florence, who, as a medical missionary, takes the gospel to South Sudan, and while she's there on the way home trying to escape this war zone, and she's helping people with the gospel and with their health, she gets raped. I could tell you about my friend Braden, one of my heroes in the faith, who when he was a sophomore in high school, his mom had a form of cancer that couldn't be healed, and so she came home for hospice, and I'll never forget when he told me this. He said that when he was in class every day, people would come and bring notes to the teacher, like he'd hear a knock, and it was hey, Emily needs to go to the dentist, or Steven's got practice, or whatever, and it would be, so he would hear that knock. And he told me that when he was a sophomore, every single time he heard that, he thought it was a note being brought to tell him that his mom had died. And I could tell you about his faith and his trust in a God who raises the dead. Do you believe that? Do you trust that? I want to bring up the lights really quick. Part of the reason why it's hard to trust is that Jesus is incredible and he's amazing, but he's kind of hard. It's like, I can't be like Jesus. And so what God gives us are some examples, like we see in this text, to follow. And I had them. I just told you about some of them. But you got them too. If you're a youth pastor or a youth leader, would you stand up for me? If you're a youth pastor or a youth leader, stand up. I know, they're great. Let's hold the applause. Hold on. Just listen for a sec. If you're an upperclassman, a junior or senior, and because of their example, because of one of these people that's standing up, you've seen what it looks like to live a life where you trust in the God who raises the dead. Would you stand up if you have been influenced by one of these people? Okay. Now, if you're an underclassman, if you're a freshman or a sophomore, and one of these older people, whether it's one of the super old youth leaders or one of the young, cool, fresh, or juniors or seniors, and those people have loved you and shown you an example of faithfulness to follow, would you also stand up? Okay, so listen to this. Hebrews chapter 11 ends with these words. Remember, Abraham and Sarah, they trusted, but they didn't get to receive the promise. They trusted in a God who would raise the dead. And part of what I want you to do in your groups this afternoon is I want you to make a list of the people who live a life that helps you believe God can raise the dead. And then I want you to think, and I'm going to pray these words over you, Hebrews chapter 11, verses 39 through 40. All these, look around at each other. Don't look at me, look at each other. All these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised. You don't have the promise yet. You haven't gotten it yet. Since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. You're not there yet, but look around together because something better is coming.